Before we begin, if this is your first video based on this story, allow me to direct you to the series playlist, so you can start from the introductory video if you need a refresher on the character in question for this story. The playlist link will be present in the description. With that out of the way, I'm a Spectrum D, but you may also call me Lewis, and welcome to the Fiction Forge. The expression Anne wore could only be described as a triad of negative emotions: shock, confusion, and deep sadness. The 15-minute taxi ride from the center of Moria felt like time had been halted for her. Both then and now, any noise around her sounded muffled and distorted, as if she was submerged in water and said noise came from the surface above. The young woman finally snapped back to reality upon feeling a hand on her arm. Both Jotaro and Joseph had been calling her name and prompting her to leave the back seat of the car following the end of the ride. She exited the vehicle with haste, and the driver was granted his leave, setting off down the narrow road. Joseph elected to retreat to his room for the remainder of the night. As Anne was about to do the same, Jotaro called for her attention. She turned to face him. Her myriad thoughts were clearly visible in her distant brown eyes. The capped crusader gave her a simple message before walking into the hotel lobby himself, lightly tipping his hat. When she was done with what she had to do, come to his room. They had stuff to talk about. He didn't ask for a response, nor did he leave her time for one. This was clearly important. Anne swallowed and went to her room, but left herself time to check to see that Joseph was alright. Upon entering her modestly sized space, she removed her coat, clutched it by the hood, and tossed it toward the nearby hat stand, not caring to see if it landed as she walked sluggishly to the bathroom to rinse off her face. She dried off with a small towel and peered at her reflection in the mirror. What she saw was an apprehensive, doubtful expression on the visage looking back at her. For a moment, she contemplated. Had she really thought this through? Was she out of her depth? Could she actually do what she came here to do now they knew the stakes? The anxiety increased little by little, to the point where Anne thought she'd start hyperventilating at any moment. Her trance was broken as Jotaro's voice could be heard on the other side of the main door, asking if something was going on. Anne took a deep breath and replied with a no, trying to make sure her voice was steady. It appeared to be enough. Jotaro regarded her reply and ushered her to meet him as arranged, before it got too late. His quiet footsteps faded out until nothing suggesting his presence remained. Anne briefly glanced at the mirror through the open bathroom door, but shook it off and power walked out the main door, locking it behind her after closing it tightly. It took considerable effort to block out the nigh overwhelming feelings racing in the back of her mind as she walked to the short distance to Jotaro's room. After finding the correct room number, she steeled herself and put out her hand to open the door. However, her former fellow traveler beat her to it and greeted her, having also elected to do away with his coat. He gestured for her to enter his noticeably larger quarters, which she did. As she entered, Jotaro shut the door and purposefully walked right past her toward a pair of tall, muted red chairs with a small table placed between them, and atop it were a silver tray and a tea set, the teapot lightly steaming with a freshly made beverage. He took the seat facing the back of the room and looked to Anne expectantly. Down to the business at hand as usual. Catching his gaze, Anne briskly made her way to the adjacent seat and took it as Jotaro poured them both a drink. Even without employing Star Platinum's abilities, his very keen eye could see the slight shaking in the runaway's movements as she picked up the small cup. Being the blunt and upfront man he was, Jotaro brought this fact up, having this serve as the opener to what was going to be a discomforting discussion to say the least. Anne went still mid-sip. Her attempt to save face had gone awry. The uneasiness grew on her face as she set the cup back down on the table. Jotaro continued. It made sense that she was still in shock after listening to Josuke and Reimi. She had to explain through Koichi, since she couldn't see her. It was pretty heavy stuff. This was his way of conveying his sympathies. He was never the best when it came to feelings, always more of a show don't tell kind of person. Anne held her chin in her palm, partially blocking one side of her face with her fingers as she closed her eyes. So much was going on in her head at once, and she was struggling to process it. Not only had she learned of the existence of ghosts, coupling that with the murder of Raimi's family, Shigechi, and countless others to the same person, on top of the unknown number of future victims, the mere notion of having concerns about herself felt selfish. There it was again. That same infuriating selfishness she had upon learning of the Crusaders' mission to save Jotaro's mother the first time. Anne began to vent unconsciously. A kid was killed today without a trace by a stand user. His family would go without clarity or peace of mind for the rest of their lives, and no one knew who or when the killer would strike next. And yet here she was with her own self-doubt and personal agenda finding a way into her mind, like a cerebral Trojan horse. It made her sick to feel so conflicted over something that went against the promise she made all those years ago. Having finally regained control of herself and realized what she just said, she went quiet. Meanwhile, Jotaro put everything into place in his head. For years, Anne was doing exactly what she said, helping people as best she could regardless of the effect on her. Alternatively, she only dealt with normal people with somewhat conventional or realizable solutions. But here and now, her mind was split between opposing sides. The mortal side set on self-preservation, and the honorable side set on staying true to her word, seeking justice, and proving her worth. He leaned forward in his chair slightly, redrawing the young woman's attention, and concluded aloud. That's why she came with Joseph to Moria, not only to reunite with old friends and show how she changed, but to prove that she could be more than the liability she was back then, to prove she could help. But then he inquired, who was she really proving her worth to? Them? Or herself? This brought about an unexpected epiphany in Anne's head. She hadn't previously considered the idea her mission could have been a subconscious one of self-worth. Yet it seemed so obvious in that moment. Like having the answer to a quiz question on the tip of one's tongue, but not remembering until someone else beat them to it. Jotaro took a sip from his own teacup, and then stated that, personally, he never thought she had anything to prove to him. He suspected Joseph felt similarly. Yet another silence befell the pair. However, it was a short one, as Anne had one last concern to voice, which she did somewhat coldly. What happens to her now? Was she to relive her last parting from the team, albeit via the waters of Moria as opposed to the skies of India? She steeled herself internally for Jotaro to say he'd already arranged a pickup for the following day, reasoning that this whole thing was beyond her, and despite her noble intentions, they both underestimated the dangers lurking in this quiet town. Only that answer never came. Instead, he turned his head towards the window, simply saying that he didn't know, it wasn't his decision to make. Anne's eyes widened and her irises shrank to a degree that suitably showed how startled she was. This day presented one surprise after another. Jotaro looked back and noticed her disbelief. He explained that she was just an oblivious runaway bystander who got caught up in their business last time, and she was sent home for the sake of both their mission and her safety. He then shifted to the present. In the here and now, she was a grown, informed adult who made the decision to come intentionally. If she was out of her depth, she could be picked up at dawn with no questions asked nor judgment made. However, if she wanted to stay and pursue both her personal mission as well as the killer, she had that liberty. That said, she'd need to understand and accept that they wouldn't be with her 24/7, so she had to take responsibility for her own safety. That was non-negotiable. Otherwise, it was down to her alone. Anne considered carefully, weighing up her options with building frustration until she came to a conclusion. She winced and proclaimed, "Fuck it." She came here with a point to prove and a promise to keep, and now there were innocent victims to a law-proof murderer that needed to be held accountable. She may not have had a stand, but it just meant she had to pay closer attention, think up contingencies, and take opportunities when they came up. With Anne having made her choice, though perhaps with more energy than his tolerance would typically allow, Jotaro implored her to settle down a bit and call it a night. Their investigation started in the morning. Anne contained her burst of vigor and determination barely, made her way to the door, and stopped for a moment. She looked up to her friend with a request. She couldn't sleep the way she was right now, so she was going to brainstorm until she fell asleep. But she asked to meet up the following night to present anything she came up with. With her request accepted, Anne sauntered through the door and down the hall, too set on her goals to look back. Jotaro muttered to himself, "Good freaking grief," as he closed the door behind her, shaking his head. So much for someone else's pain in the ass. If you happen to have enjoyed what you found, do subscribe to the channel, enable notifications, and keep an eye on the community tab or join the Discord server for further updates. With that all being said, I've been a Spectrum D on the Fiction Forge, and until next time, fare thee well.